Hi there, this is Dave Litten and a warm welcome to one of my PRINCE2 Practitioner personal coaching videos. You may well know that as well as our video-based PRINCE2 Practitioner Masterclass, that I also provide one-to-one personal coaching, usually via Zoom, Skype or Microsoft Teams. And today I want to share with you, as an ex-examiner, some approaches and techniques that may help you when answering risk-related questions in your practitioner exam. One of the main areas that students struggle with in the exam itself is identifying which type of risk responses are being used and asked in the question itself. Now, the risk theme in the PRINCE2 manual is quite detailed and covers a lot of ground. So this coaching video is going to focus on the planning of the risk responses themselves. Of course, I need to give you a little bit of background first, so let's get stuck straight in. So I'm talking here about the plan step within the risk theme. Just to be clear, you understand that a risk is measured by a combination of the probability of a perceived threat or an opportunity occurring, and then checking the magnitude of such a threat or opportunity on the project objectives. And you may be aware that the size of the risk, or as we call it, the risk severity, can be found by looking at the probability of that risk occurring and the impact. Now, if you have numeric scales for these, then you could literally just multiply the two together. I'll give you an example of that later. But there's actually three parts to a risk. And it's another area where students don't take enough notice. So let me just try that on you here. To start with, you have the cause of a risk, sometimes called the risk drivers. And as a result of those, what may result is the risk event uncertainty itself, which in turn will affect one or more of the project objectives. The example I usually give is if you've got to travel the next morning and you hear that there's going to be a lot of rain during the night, with the consequence of local roads being flooded and delays at junctions. And the risk event itself is how much delays will occur on your journey. And the ultimate project objective in this case is, let's assume, attending an important meeting some few hours drive away. So the overall risk exposure of your project needs to be kept under review, along with the impact of the risk on the overall business justification for the project. It certainly is a balancing act, where you need to make sure that the benefits of the project are weighed up against the costs and risks. Now, there's two types of risks, as I'm sure you know. The first is the most familiar one, and that's called a risk threat. And this is an uncertain event which has a negative impact on objectives. This is the usual use of the word risk in our daily lives. But of course, a risk can also be positive. And in this case, we call it an opportunity. Why is this still a risk? Because it's an uncertain event. But should it occur, it will have a positive impact on your project objectives. They're both bound together by their probability, which makes them both two different types of risks. Now, it's important that risk responses, as I've said in the previous slide, balance the cost of implementing the response against the probability and impact of allowing the risk to occur. Now, this can be assessed by comparing risk differences of what's known as the expected monetary value before and after the risk response has been put in place. Again, this is just a bit of tutorial just to make sure you're on point, okay? So for example, here's three risks in your project. Here's the probability of each occurring and the cost impact should they occur. By multiplying 75% by $85,000, you get the expected value. Now, after thinking through responses and applying them, one would expect to see that the total, in this case by adding up the expected value, is a lot less than before, because the responses will make, in this case, the probability would drop from 75% to 25%. Adding up these, you've reduced expected monetary value down to about a third of the previous value. So it's sensible that if the cost of the risk response is lower than the reduction in the expected monetary value, that means it's worth undertaking and implementing the risk response. Fairly standard stuff, I'm sure you'll agree. Now, any chosen response needs to be built into the appropriate level of plan. You know that in PRINCE2, there's the project plan, there's stage plans, and there's the team plan. And consideration should be given to the effect of such possible responses on those plans and indeed even work packages. So let's get to the heart of the matter. This video is about planning risk responses, but we need to understand where we are here. Here's a diagram you'll be familiar with. Step 1 is identify, step 2 is assess, step 3 is plan, which is where the responses are created, and then you implement them, and the cycle continues. The communicate step in the middle happens at all levels and mostly covers the reports which you're familiar with. So let's focus on the plan step. This is to prepare responses to both threats and opportunities, to remove or reduce threats and to maximize opportunities. That's what you'd want to do, isn't it? So you can apply these responses in combination. And here's a nice graphic showing you what they are. Here's all the threat responses in green here and the opportunity responses in blue. Share, pain and gain you can use for both threats and opportunities. And I'll be going through these in the coming slides. But just for now, be clear on this. All of these mean that you're taking action now. Avoid, reduce, transfer, share, accept, exploit and reject. The only difference is fallback is where you plan to carry it out later, where you choose to do nothing now, but if the risk materializes, you've got a plan B, if you like, in your back pocket, and that's when you'll implement that response. So again, just a little bit of background to help prepare for the rest of the slides. I just want to talk about residual and secondary risks, so that if a threat is reduced rather than removed, therefore there must be some remaining risk, since it's just reduced. This is called a residual risk, and if the residual risk is significant, then it may be appropriate to select more than one risk response. Yes, indeed, that picture I've just shown you with the various responses, it doesn't necessarily mean you'll apply one response, you might be applying several. So let's start with the inherent primary risk, the risk that you've identified. You then implement a response, whatever that is, and for a reduced threat, that will mean there is some amount of residual risk. I've shown it as such here. And as I've suggested, you might be using more than one response. Going back to our implemented response, the primary implementation, this could in and of itself reduce or remove other risks. Very often, reducing one will have a knock-on effect on other risks, as I'm suggesting here. However, by implementing your primary response, that may have a knock-on effect of creating new secondary risks. So with that as a backdrop, let's now look at both threat and opportunity responses. Starting off with avoid. Now, as I say, these next few slides cover parts of the exam which candidates often struggle with. So what does avoid mean? It means you carry out some upfront response now and it removes the risk entirely. The risk has gone to 0%, either in terms of its impact and or its probability. And this normally means you go in a different direction to sidestep the risk. The avoid, therefore, makes an uncertain situation certain by removing the cause of the threat. Now, costs will normally be incurred to remove all residual risk, and these too need to be justified. So let's be clear, taking avoiding action means the risk is zero. Let's look at an opportunity. Here we use the word exploit. Just like avoid got rid of the risk, exploit makes the opportunity 100% certain. And it does this by implementing the cause of the opportunity. Remember those 3 steps we covered just now? And the action to remove the risk may incur no extra cost. Yes, let's just take the avoid again. You're taking a different route. Perhaps you realise there's a threat to developing software in-house, but you're now going to outsource that as part of your project and use an experienced and excellent organisation that has the software already working. So in other words, the risk is zero because you're doing something different. Then there's the reduce step. Now this, unlike avoid, which means it's a zero threat or it's 100% opportunity, here you're partially getting rid of it. You're acting now to change the probability and or the impact of the risk. And by change we mean to reduce it. You may hear the term mitigate, which means just that. It's taking actions or responses to make the threat less likely and or reduce the impact if indeed it occurred. And this will incur costs that also need to be justified. The opportunity version of reduce is called enhance. You can see the difference. Exploit means it's 100%. Enhance means you've increased your chances of this opportunity being realised. So you're making the opportunity more likely to occur and or increasing the impact, the positive impact, if it did. Once more, response costs must be justified in terms of the change to the residual risk. So let's now look at risk transfer responses. What about transferring a threat? Well, this is where you pass part of the risk to a third party. And a common way of doing this is via insurance, where the insurer picks up the risk cost, but where the insured retains the impact on other objectives, for example, time delay. The point I'm making here is you may be able to insure against money, but you can't insure against time. So hence me including the example of delay. You can also use a contract to transfer a threat, where the terms and conditions of the contract makes the other party liable. Again, take care here, because the contract might cover the pain of increased costs, but very often suing the other party won't help you get back time, if you see the point I'm making. What about an opportunity, transferring that? Again, a third party gains a cost benefit in this case, but the primary risk taker gains another benefit. This is not a commonly used option. You see, the cost of transference must be justified in terms of the change to residual risk in order to determine if the premium that you're paying is actually worth it. It's back to those set of scales again. And some elements of risk cannot be transferred, as I've suggested, but an organisation may choose to delegate the entire risk management to a third party. Again, that's transferring a risk. Now, at the end of this video, I'm going to cover just a few simple examples from the practitioner exam. But while I'm going through this, you may want to pause this video and think about what actions you could take to transfer a threat or transfer an opportunity in a project that you're familiar with. What about share risk responses? Well, this is where you can share the risk either for a threat or an opportunity. Now, risks can rarely be entirely shared this way, as I've suggested. And the primary risk taker will need to protect its brand and reputation. But this can be a way to encourage close collaboration on risk management, particularly within programs and projects. And what you must be absolutely clear on is that share is a different option than transferring. With share, you're sharing either the pain or the gain should the threat or opportunity arise. And it seeks multiple parties, typically within a supply chain, to share the risk, and as I've just said, pain-gain share basis. So as a result of risk management, if an opportunity now happens due to your responses, then that may mean some monetary payment on an agreed formula. By the same token, if a risk occurred and costs were therefore incurred, then again the costs will then need to be assigned to the parties concerned. What about accept risk responses, either to a threat or an opportunity? Well, the accept option simply means that the organisation takes the chance that the risk will occur, accepting its full impact if it did. Now, although that might be the right thing to do when you first start creating your plan, but whenever you accept either a threat or an opportunity, you want to keep your options open. Keep a close eye on that action, because at some point in the future, you may decide that acceptance is not the right path. So review it regularly to ensure it does indeed remain the best option. Like I said earlier, sometimes these responses are used in tandem. You might have an accept, but also have a back contingency plan in case the situation changes. So this is the take no action option, the do nothing option. Do remember this. When you accept it, you're saying, I'll take what comes. I won't do anything to try and stop it. Now, there is no change, of course, to residual risk, since you're doing nothing. However, neither are any costs incurred now to manage the risk or to prepare to manage the risk in future. So this is the zero option. It's also the zero cost, if you see my point. So the accept option is normally used for where you have a risk with low probability and or low impact, where you can accept the consequences should it still occur. Of course, sometimes you have to accept risks simply because you can't do anything about them. Now, an example here in the financial world could be the risk to profitability because of currency fluctuations. If you're importing materials or equipment from another country, then the price may go up or down depending on currency exchange rates. And an organisation may decide to take the chance and not engage in any hedging or other provision to protect margins from a wide variation in exchange rates. And note that in the case I've given of currency fluctuations, the impact could be positive or negative. Still looking at the accept risk response, do remember this, that this can only be used if the risk exposure is less than risk tolerance, okay? Because clearly, if it wasn't, then that would be unacceptable. So this actually becomes two risks, because there's a risk leading to a loss and a risk leading to a gain. So framing the uncertainty as two risks will allow for different responses to each part. Now I have to tell you, in the exam, the typical questions will be fairly straightforward. Next up, I want to talk about contingent risk actions, sometimes called fallback. So what you'll do here is you'll prepare contingency plans for either and or both threats and opportunities. Now this option involves preparing the plans now, but not acting now. You're taking no action. In effect, you're putting them in your bottom drawer, you've pre-thought them through, and you only implement them should the risk occur or look like it's about to occur. So preparing contingency plans often associated with the accept option. So preparing contingency plans states that we will accept the risk for now, but we will plan for what we will do if and should the situation change. And this option applies equally to other responses. You could use contingent risk responses for any of the others, and is often referred to as a fallback plan. That is, what we will do if the original response does not work, or does not work effectively enough. So fallback plans can be applied to all other response strategies, even avoiding a threat and exploiting an opportunity. And you would want to use it in a situation where the original plan may not be successful, despite, at the time they were thought through, good intentions. Now, a quick look at risk response implications. Fairly obvious, this slide. You can use risk management responses in combination, I've said that several times, and investing money now to respond to a risk is fine, but such investments do need to be cost justified. Now, some risk responses, as I've suggested, will reduce or remove other related risks, while other implemented responses to risk will maybe change some aspect of the project. And third, this may lead to secondary risks. Again, we've touched on that earlier. Risks that occur because of invoking a risk response itself. Okay, now, I started off by saying the biggest problem that PRINCE2 Practitioner exam candidates have is in a question seeing a list of actions and having to determine what type of response they actually are. So I want to deal with that now. First up, my advice is keep a cool head. And this is where candidates throw marks away. You see, the examiner is nearly always giving you clues as to what sort of a response they're actually talking about. Now, you know that the risk may or may not happen in the future. That's its definition. So if the words say something like would or could or may or might, it's a risk. They're talking about something that might happen. Compare and contrast that with an issue. So do remember the risk and issue difference when looking at, frankly, risk and issue questions, but let's keep to risk questions. You know that an issue has already happened, different to a risk. So if the words say has or is, for example, within the question, then it's an issue or a change or an off specification. Got the idea? So just looking out for these will get you easy marks when it comes to risk questions. And risk tolerance. You're probably familiar that this is only used as an aggregated value, maybe on a group of risks or the entire project, or as an individual value for threats. Do remember that when it comes to risk tolerances, they are only stated within the risk management approach, within a stage plan, or indeed a work package. The key word here is risk tolerance can only be used for risk-related actions. And another trick the examiner will test you on is in setting up a question, they'll suggest that you could use spare money elsewhere, such as there might be some stage cost tolerance left over and you could use this to fund risks. The answer is never. In a similar way, when it comes to the risk budget, do you remember that's set out ring-fenced, if you will, and only used to fund risk responses, including the management of such responses. So never use tolerances or change budgets to fund risks. Indeed, don't try to steal from change budgets or tolerances. Keep them entirely separate. And here's the biggie. Be 100% clear on examples of risk response types. Believe me, this is the biggest killer of lost exam marks. I know from my coaching students, when I set them sample exams, even though they're very smart individuals, they'll often get these wrong simply by misreading the type of response that's being suggested within the question. So, on that basis, here's a simple invented question. Imagine the threat of a competitor producing a rival product to be delivered earlier than the one your project is currently creating. And if this happens, this would reduce the projected sales income of your product, because now in effect, those who want to purchase your product will have a choice. So the benefits of your revenue will drop. Now be clear here. The threat is that the rival product might be delivered earlier than your project. Okay? And let me just remind you, here's the choices you've got about responses. Avoid, reduce, contingency, transfer, share, accept, reject, exploit and enhance. Imagine in the exam you've just seen this as a question and you know this stuff. Indeed, you could refer to it in your official PRINCE2 manual. But that doesn't help you in the moment of the exam. Your head is spinning. Which one? Which one? Which one? Well, let's try out this question. What if the question said, the action taken is to decide not to compete and cancel the project? Which one of these is the right answer? Well, it's avoid. Okay, now you've seen it, you go, oh yes, of course, it's obvious. But in the heat of the exam, when you just see this and you look at this lot, your head's spinning. You might be thinking, oh, is this a reduce or is it a transfer? No, it's not. Is it accepting it? No, I'm not sure. It's avoiding it. As the Americans say, you go around the rock in the road. Cancelling the project means you avoid this being a threat. How about this question? Bring the target date of the project forward. I can see the point here. So it looks like your competitor will put their product on the marketplace earlier than you. If you bring this forward, you might be able to get ahead of them. What sort of an action is that? What's it doing to the threat? Because these are threats, not opportunities. Well, the answer is it's reducing it. Bringing the target date forward would reduce the impact, but it won't necessarily remove it entirely. How about this one? Carry on with the project as planned on the basis that your product is believed to be of better quality than your competitor. What sort of an action is that out of these choices? Yep, it's another accept. You're just saying carry on, take no action. It's the do nothing option. Another one? If the question said wait for confirmation of the rival's product and, because they're talking about it just as a threat, not as an absolute, and if required, include additional functionality as an extra sales incentive. Which one of these is your response type? Well, the clue is in the word wait. You've probably guessed it. It's contingency, or fallback as it's sometimes called. You've got a plan B in your back pocket, but you don't intend to use it until and unless it's needed. Another one? Record the risk in the risk register and monitor the situation. What are you doing here? The answer is not a lot. So this again is an example of accept. You'll take it on the chin if indeed the competitor does get their product out and earlier than yours. So just finally, in case you didn't know that not only here at Projects Academy, we have an excellent video-based PRINCE2 Foundation and Practitioner Masterclass. For the last 2 years, I've been offering one-to-one PRINCE2 coaching, and I can only take on a handful at a time to ensure of the success of this coaching. So would you like a guaranteed practitioner exam pass? I say that because over the past 2 years, not a single one of my coaching students have failed. They always pass at their first attempt. So we all learn in different ways. Indeed, Projects Academy's PRINCE2 Practitioner Masterclass is an absolute world beater. But maybe you might be looking for a personal coach. In which case, would you like me to personally PRINCE2 study coach you to exam success? That's both foundation and practitioner. And as one of my coaching students, you get full access to all of our project management masterclass training courses, including, of course, full access to our PRINCE2 Foundation and Practitioner Masterclass. Indeed, it's used by me during our coaching sessions. So why not let me lift the exam weight from your shoulders as I provide you with regular one-to-one personal coaching study sessions on your pathway to become a PRINCE2 practitioner. You and I will spend well over 20 hours together, usually via Microsoft Teams, Skype or Zoom, and where I will give you out assignments, bringing it to a total of 10 2-hour coaching sessions, all done at a time frame that suits you. Now, if you'd like an initial, no commitment, informal chat with me, just to discuss what you need and what I can offer you, then hop on over to www.projects.com/Prince2-coach, where you can express an interest and we'll book a one-to-one chat together to determine if you want to become a Prince2 practitioner within the next few weeks using an ex-examiner, that's me, to help you pass the exam at first try. Whatever you decide, my name's Dave Litten from Projects Academy, and I wish you all the very best on your pathway to becoming a Prince2 practitioner.